Welcome to the Still Point Podcast. If you're new here, this show lives at the intersection of jiu-jitsu and stoicism and what it actually looks like to be a man who is trying to show up fully. For his family, for the people he leads, and for himself. We don't do motivation here. We don't do therapy speak. We just talk about real things honestly and let them land where they land. I've been training jiu-jitsu for 10 years. I've been lifting for over 25. I finished my master's degree in social work. So when I talk about discipline, about what it costs to keep going, and about what it means to be a man who takes his physical and mental health seriously while also being a husband and a father, I'm not theorizing, I'm living it. But today's episode is a little different. Over the last 13 episodes, we've stayed close to the map. And today I want to zoom out a bit. I want to talk about a book I'm reading. Not to review it, but to pull some of the ideas out of it that I think every man, every coach, and every husband, and especially every father, needs to sit with. The book is called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust and came out of it with a framework for human meaning that I think is one of the most important things a man can read, period. The ideas connect directly to Stoicism, to jiu-jitsu, into something most men are either figuring out or avoiding entirely. Why they do what they do, and whether the reason is strong enough to keep them going when everything else is pulling them in a different direction. Viktor Frankl described a specific moment when he arrived at Auschwitz. Not panic, not screaming, not breaking down, numbness. His brain just shut off. The horror was too much to process in real time. So the mind did the only thing it could do. It went quiet. It disconnected from what the eyes were seeing and the body was experiencing, and it just stopped reacting. He called that emotional death, a survival mechanism. The psyche protecting itself from something it couldn't metabolize. Now think about a man who has been grinding for years, training before work, coming home exhausted, juggling school or a demanding job, or maybe both. Kids who need everything. A marriage that requires constant investment. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the original reason he started training gets harder and harder to see. He doesn't quit, not yet, but he goes through the motions. He shows up, but there's not really the fire there. That fire that brought him to the mat in the first place has gone quiet. That's not weakness. That's just what happens when a man loses his why. Frankl spent years studying that exact problem. What keeps a man going when the circumstances give him every reason to stop? What separates the men who find a way through from the men who don't? The answer he found is the same answer the Matt has been teaching for decades. Meaning. Not motivation, meaning. And that's what this episode is about. The suffering has a purpose. Frankl wrote that suffering in itself is meaningless. It's what you do with it that determines everything. He wasn't talking about suffering for its own sake. He wasn't glorifying pain. He was making a specific observation about human beings under pressure. The ones who assigned meaning to what they were going through, who saw it as something they were enduring for a reason, held together in ways that the ones without that anchor simply couldn't. Every man who has trained jiu-jitsu long enough knows this exact feeling from the inside. There are sessions that break you, where nothing works, where you get tapped by people you shouldn't be getting tapped by, where your body is wrong and your timing is off and your mind is somewhere else entirely. And you have a choice in that moment. You can decide the suffering means you're not good enough, that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is too wide to close. That this isn't for you. Or you can decide the suffering is the point. Not because hard is good for its own sake, because the man on the other side of that session, the one who stayed, who ground through it, who figured something out in the middle of feeling completely lost, that man is different from the one who walked in. Something got built in there. Something that doesn't show up on a highlight reel, but shows up when it actually matters. And Frankl called that tragic optimism. The ability to say, yes, this is hard. Yes, this is painful. Yes, this is painful. And yes, I am going to find something in it worth holding on to. That's not positivity. That's not motivation. That's a decision a man makes about what his experience means, and it changes everything about how he moves through it. The mat doesn't care about your feelings, doesn't adjust to your schedule or your mood or how your day went. It just presents the problem and waits. What you decide that problem means is entirely up to you. And coaches, I want to speak to you for a second. Here's the number that should bother every coach in the room. By my estimations, roughly 3 out of every 10 white belts make it to black belt. Probably even less than that. Roughly 3 out of 10. 7 people walked through your door, invested time, money, ego, and physical effort, and quit somewhere along the way. Some quit early, some make it to blue belt and disappear, which is where the biggest drop-off actually happens. Some get to purple and then you never see them again. The number one reason why people quit jiu-jitsu is comparison. They look sideways. They see someone who started around the same time moving better, getting promoted faster, tapping people that they can't tap. And instead of using that as information, they use it as a verdict. They decide that the gap means something permanent and they leave before finding out that they're wrong. A coach's real job is to interrupt that story before it finishes writing itself. Not by protecting people from hard roles, not by handing out false encouragement, but by pointing the lens in the right direction, by pairing a struggling white belt with someone they can actually move sometimes, by showing them their own progress instead of letting them measure themselves against someone 3 years ahead of them, by making the meaning visible when the practitioner can't see it themselves. Frankl wrote that meaning is not found in grand moments. It is made in small ones, in the minor victories that accumulate into something a person can point to and say, I did that. That's mine. That's what a good coach does. He manufactures small moments of meaning. He gives the practitioner evidence that contradicts the story they're about to tell themselves about quitting. Because quitting is easy. It's always the easier choice. And the mat will give a man 100 legitimate reasons to walk away before it gives him one undeniable reason to stay. The coach's job is to be that reason, consistently, without fanfare, just showing up and pointing people back towards their own progress until they can do it themselves. If you coach, that's the weight you carry, and it matters more than the technique you taught that day. Now let me give you 3 men: a slave, an emperor, a psychiatrist in a concentration camp. Epictetus was born into slavery. No freedom, no property, no legal standing as a human being. Everything external stripped away or withheld by design. And he arrived at a conclusion that became the foundation of Stoic philosophy, that there is only one thing that can never be taken from you: your response to what happens to you, your inner life. The way you choose to interpret your circumstances and act within them. He didn't have anything else, so he went deep into the one thing he did have and built an entire philosophy around it. Marcus Aurelius had everything. Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the known world. Every external thing Epictetus was denied, Marcus Aurelius had it in excess. And he sat alone at night and wrote to himself about the same conclusion: that none of it meant anything if he couldn't govern his own mind. That the only thing worth building was character, the capacity to show up regardless of circumstance and do what was right. The slave and the emperor, opposite ends of every external spectrum, same conclusion. And then Frankl, stripped of everything in conditions designed to destroy the human spirit completely, watching some men hold together and some men collapse, and finding that the difference was almost never physical. It was meaning. The men who had a reason, however small, however uncertain, kept their inner life intact when everything outside it was being demolished. 3 men. 3 completely different circumstances. 1 conclusion. What you build inside is the only thing that is truly yours. The mat teaches this the hard way. You can have the best coach, the best training partners, the best gym in the city. But if you don't have a reason, a real one, not just a goal you wrote down, the first extended rough patch will take you out. Because the external things will not be enough. They never are. The why has to live inside, and it has to be strong enough to survive the days when nothing outside is confirming it. And now I'll speak to the man at home. Most men who train are fighting a version of this battle on two fronts, on the mat and at home. The conversation goes something like this. You want to train 4 days a week. Your wife thinks that's too much. You have kids who need you. There are things around the house. And slowly, without even realizing it, you start negotiating your training down, asking permission, justifying it, and resentment starts to build on both sides. Her feeling like you're choosing the gym over the family, you feeling like you're being managed out of the one thing that keeps you level. That situation almost always traces back to one thing. The expectation was never set. When my wife and I first got serious, I told her directly that my health comes first. Not in a selfish way, not in an I don't care about you way, but in the sense that I understood something that took me a long time to be able to explain clearly. She got upset at first, understandably. It sounds like you're saying you matter more than the family, but that's not what that means. I come first so that I can be what this family needs. I train so that I am capable, so that I am not another dad bod that can't run a block with his kids, so that if something happens, real danger, real emergency, I am not the liability in the room, I am the solution. I train so that my kids grow up watching a man who takes his body and his mind seriously. Because my wife doesn't train, she doesn't lift, she doesn't study this stuff. So if my kids are going to see what that looks like, it has to come from me. That weight falls on my shoulders and I accept it. That's not selfish. That's the most responsible framing of training I know. Frankl would recognize it immediately. Its meaning. A reason that goes so far beyond personal preference that it reframes the entire conversation. You're not training because you like it. You're training because you have decided what kind of man your family deserves and you are building him deliberately every single day. When the why is that clear, the permission conversation never happens. Because you're not asking for time to do something for yourself. You're investing in the only version of yourself that can actually protect and lead the people depending on you. Set the expectation early. Have the conversation directly. And then give grace when it's earned. Not because your autonomy is negotiable, but because the people who love you deserve some flexibility too. That's not weakness. That's a man who knows the difference between holding his ground and being unreasonable. And I want to leave you with this. Frankl survived one of the worst things a human can experience. And what he came out with wasn't bitterness or a manual for avoiding suffering. It was a framework for finding meaning inside of all of it. And that's what the mat gives you if you stay long enough to receive it. The hard sessions are not obstacles to your training. They are the training. The comparison that makes you want to quit is not evidence that you don't belong. It's the ego getting in the way of the lesson. The rough patch in your marriage, the season where everything feels like obligation, that's not a sign that you chose wrong. That's what sustained commitment actually looks like from the inside. The men who figure that out don't train harder than everyone else. They just have a better reason. Find yours. Not a goal, not a number on a scale or a belt around your waist. A reason. Something true enough and deep enough that it holds up on the days when nothing external is confirming it. Set the expectation at home before the negotiation starts. Be the example your kids need because nobody else in your house is going to be it. Show up on the mat because the man you are building there is the man your family is depending on when it actually counts. And when it gets hard, because it will, remember what Frankl figured out in the worst possible circumstances. That the suffering is not the problem. The meaning you assign to it is everything. Get back on the mat. Thank you.